I'm going to be talking about exploring your APIs with Postman. Just curious, how many people out here are testers or QA people? All right, a lot. I was a little worried because there wasn't a lot of test activity on the program besides myself, but the fact is that testers love Postman because it is so great as a tool, not just for validating schema and stuff, but for really exploring the APIs. And let's see if this works. It works, yay. So I started out, I was giving a talk about REST APIs, and just a little background on myself. I work at Big Fish Games. I've been there since 2008, and I'm testing the services behind the games. Thankfully, I'm not a game tester, because I think I would go crazy if I had to play the same game every day for months on end. I get to play the services. I get to play with the services behind, the plumbing, and it's pretty fun. I've been doing that since 2008, and a couple years ago I gave a presentation on REST API testing, and I mentioned, oh, and then there's this Postman tool, and I sort of said offhandedly, I could probably do an entire presentation just about Postman. And so then I thought, yeah, I should do that. So I've been doing presentations about Postman at test conferences. People really love it. And when I'm talking about Postman, I'm talking about exploratory testing with it. And so just a really quick talk about what is exploratory testing. So this is where you don't have a set script, you don't have a set of test steps that you're going through. This is where you're basically, I'm going to look at this one area, and I'm going to just dig in and see what happens in this one area in more of a human sort of way rather than a machine sort of way. And a lot of times as an artifact of exploratory testing, you have tests that then a machine can do, and that's great. But the real fun part of testing, and the reason why I love it, is when you get to do this exploring, sort of like Nancy Drew here with the clock. That's me with my little screwdriver into the API. So, all right. So, I think we all know, we all realize that testing the APIs is super important. It's still pretty common, I think, for people to think of testing as, well, we have the application and we're going to test the website. We're going to test it at the UI layer. And even in the test automation, people are talking about Selenium and how we're going to be able to get the machine to push the buttons in the right order and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of effort put into the UI. But when you have an API that you're testing, it needs to be tested on its own, because if you are in Chrome or you're in a proxy tool, anybody can get that API and start playing with it. Any person in the world can find out what your API does and start doing things with it. And there was a case last month, I guess this was, where people had a website that hooked into mobile APIs like Sprint and T-Mobile and getting all that information, and they had it password protected on the website, but their API didn't have any password protection. So people, hackers, security researchers, hopefully it was the security researchers first and not the hackers, that go in and say, hey, by the way, I can get your API into my command line, and I can get everybody's data in the entire United States through your website. Thank you very much. So that's the sort of thing we definitely want to avoid with good testing. So the way this is going to go is I'm going to go through the slides, sort of a basic test methodology that I like to use, and then I'm going to actually do live demonstration of testing. It's going to be very exciting. So the first thing that's really important is getting the goods into Postman. Not all of us are working at organizations that start with Postman. A lot of times we'll be working with games or with applications, websites that already have APIs baked in, and we need... Did I just lose the mic? It's all right. Okay. And we need to pull those out of the wild and get them into Postman where we can start taming them. So we're going to go over a couple of different ways. Copy as curl is my very favorite feature. I think probably my favorite feature in all of Postman is that you can take a curl and put it right into Postman, and there it is. So that works with Chrome DevTools. It works with Charles Proxy. It probably works with Fiddler. I haven't used Fiddler in a while, but I'm sure it does. So that's really great. And then the Swagger import. Frankly, the Swagger import up to this point is not so great, but thankfully it sounds like it's going to improve with the Open API. And Swagger also provides the tool now, so you can take your Swagger spec and turn it into a real interactive sort of Postman experience for testing. So that's getting the goods in. Should I be standing closer up here? I don't know. All right. All right, and everything I'm talking about is available on my GitHub if you want to look at it. Get your samples here, Amber Tests. explore with Postman. I also have a project that will take your Charles proxy output and turn it into a collection. That's not really part of this talk, but you can go and explore my GitHub. It's extremely exciting with like 2 projects and 3 check-ins over 3 years. Anyway. Okay, so the service test strategy. Everybody likes heuristics. In the test world, there's about 1 million heuristics and words for everything, so I came up with one for myself, poised. And this is, you can read what it says, and we're going to go through each one. So then bring on all the puns, how we're poised for success, poised for whatever, blah, blah, blah. Poised. All right. So first is parameters. And this is sort of the very basic sort of validation testing. This is probably 80 to 90% of what I'm doing when I'm doing tests and creating automation is all the parameters, because there's so many parameters for a test. So this is a sample here. We have this JSON object, and it has all sorts of strings and numbers and dates, and all of these are available to play with. Just like when you have a text box and you put in different Unicode values or different numbers, or you're going to put in a 2 gigabyte string or whatever, this is the same thing you can do with a REST API and presumably GraphQL as well. I don't know as much about that. But basically, each one of these parameters is a text box for you to play with. And if it's a number, you have different things to play with. And the great thing about testing REST APIs is you can make the text box disappear and then see what happens. So all the different validation there, whether it's null, if it's invalid, if it's totally missing, these are all things that can be tested through Postman. Next is output. So output, we're talking about status codes, headers, logging, all the things that are sort of being emitted from your program. These are all important things to look at when you're testing. So status codes, it's sort of, I don't want to give any prescription about how you have to have a 400 if there's an error, or you have to have a 201 created, or blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's all a part of communication. This is all sort of ways that you're going to be communicating with developers, communicating with the designers, and communicating with what is the kind of output, and everybody agrees on the output, and you make sure that it's there. Headers, if you're supposed to be returning cookies, all that sort of stuff you can be looking at. And the logging. I think logging is getting more important these days with a lot of testing in production, sort of monitoring applications. So having a structured log, if you have a structured log, making sure that's there. Making sure you're not logging too much stuff. We had a situation where we had a service, and when there was an authentication failure, as in somebody logged in with the wrong password, something which hardly ever happens on a website, but occasionally somebody will log in with the wrong password, it would emit 90 lines of code into the log, saying that, oh my gosh, we had an authentication failure, and here's the entire stack trace, every time somebody logged in with the wrong authentication. So this is not a great thing for logging, so that's the sort of thing that you definitely want to be checking out, that you're logging stuff correctly. A little bit, I mean, not too much, but also not too little. So that's output. Interop. I mean, this is sort of the key to the whole thing, right? I mean, all our APIs are ways for different parts of the business to talk to each other. So part of our job as testers is to make sure that these contracts are understood, that they're being honored in the way that they need to happen, and also that when we're consuming other things, that we are consuming everything they could possibly give us. So it's not just, well, when we do this and we get the correct answer back. We have to know, well, what if we do something and we get an error back? What if they're not even there? What if they're really slow? I mean, these are all sorts of things that we could be doing in our testing with our dependencies, and making sure that we're communicating in the proper way with all the services and applications that are depending on our APIs. So the interop is a super important thing to look at. Security is fun. I wouldn't call myself a security tester. It's definitely an area I try to learn more about. But the great thing about Postman is it makes it pretty easy to sort of noodle around with authentication, trying to spoof things. Exposed data is kind of a big deal when you're getting error messages, stack traces, hidden APIs. I don't know how many companies use hidden APIs. I know we use them where it's like, the people that are testing the games, they don't want to have to go through the tutorial every time. They don't want to have to play 10 levels so they can unlock this thing. So there'll be some sort of secret button that will advance them through the game at a certain pace, or give them a certain amount of money, or all these. So all these APIs are made available in the test environments, and the important thing is to make sure that they stay in the test environment. So that is something to look out for as well. So that's security. And exceptions. We sort of talked about this. It's been a long time since I've seen an exception like this, but it's sort of nostalgic for me to put that up there. I have a rule with all the teams that I'm working with that there should never be an unhandled exception. Unhandled meaning either the whole service crashes, obviously, but even if it's sort of like 500 internal server, what the hell just happened? I don't know. There should always be sort of, we should know what happened if there's an error. So trying to really kind of crack down on 500 errors, making sure that people understand all the things that could go wrong, and handling that is super important. And as far as the error information, once again, if you're emitting a whole stack trace into the log or outputting it to console where somebody could read it, you're giving up information about your application that maybe you don't want to give up. But on the other hand, if you just say, oh, there was an error, oh, I had a 400 request and you told me the wrong thing, yeah. The developers that are consuming these APIs, because that's really who the customer is in a lot of cases, it's not the end consumer, it's the people that are developing against our APIs. And if they get a 400 request error and they don't know what caused that error, it makes things a lot more difficult for them. So making sure that we're handling exceptions in a way where we're giving information that's useful to the people that are consuming it, but not too useful for people that might have bad intentions is important. All right, and data. Went with the obvious here, Commander data. So we basically, there's a schema that's happening behind everything. We want to update that schema. Is it updated correctly? What if it's replicated? If it doesn't get replicated in the right amount of time, are we able to handle that? Like if you have a situation where you write something and then you immediately try to read it, what's going to happen if you have a replication lag of 500 milliseconds or 5 minutes, or replication is down completely? How's that going to happen? Unicode, this is a big one for saving usernames, and not just Chinese characters, Japanese, Arabic. Emojis are a big one. MySQL has a different encoding for emojis compared to just regular Far East languages. So you might think, oh, well, I can handle Chinese, so I can handle anything. No, the smiley face could break your whole schema. So Unicode, and then caching. So when you are caching your information, are you updating the cache? Are you deleting the cache? So these are all sort of a very quick and overview of the sorts of things that I like to look for when I'm testing. So enough of me like talking and showing slides. Let's get to the live demo of testing activities. So about how much time do I have left? What? 6 minutes. Oh my gosh. That's not as much time as I thought I had. So let's do this quickly. All right. So the application I'm going to be using is the RESTful Booker. So this is a sort of a sandbox application for API testing. It was written by Mark Winteringham. It has a pretty straightforward API and has lots of errors. So it feels real good when you're playing with it, because you feel like you're doing stuff. So let's get to Postman here. And so open. All right. So exploring RESTful Booker. So one of the things here, I have this collection. Is that even showing? Yes, it is. All right. So I can sort of run this, and I'm going to run it against production, and we sort of run it, this sort of thing. We can already see that there's issues, and I'm going to actually start a local version. Oh, I have it running. Good. So I'm going to run that again, and back. Run that again against my local, just so we can see the poor logging that's available here. So this is sort of what I was talking about in I don't know if you can see what's going on here. I'm kind of standing in the way of it. But this is it. I mean, we have like, oh, you had a 200. Oh, you had a 404. I don't know what people were saying to me, but this is what I'm saying back. So this sort of logging is very minimal. You might want to have a little more information than that. And then, OK. This is not as much time as I thought I was going to have, but let's go with it. And then as far as, yeah, we're local here. Let's do a little bit of the total price, 125. All right, that's cool. It's 125 here. What if it's 125.75? And, oh, it's still, we're rounding out the cents. And that might be OK in some countries where you don't have cents, but it's not really great here. What if I put in a dollar sign and make this a string? Then what's going to happen? Once again, it's null, right? And what happens if I do this, if I go minus 125? OK, so now we're giving customers money to make appointments with us, right? So there's no checking in the API. I mean, we might have checking on our website that's like, well, it has to be above 0. But if you're not checking the API, somebody's going to take that, and it's going to say minus 125, and then you owe them money. We don't want that. If we say null, we're going to say, well, internal server error. Once again, this is a 500 internal server error, totally not helpful at all when this happens. If this happened on your application and you saw this log, you would have no idea that it was a null value that caused this to happen. So this is where you want that. This is my favorite bug here in this little bit. I have a nice long number. What? Added time. Oh, thank goodness. OK. Yay. All right. So if I have this nice long number here, now it's only 7. So there's obviously some very weird JavaScript-y number things going on here. And so when you're doing this exploratory testing, you're not necessarily going to say, oh, well, there's obviously a problem with the blah, blah, blah library that's handling the numbers. It's more of a conversation that you're going to have. It's like, wow, I did this and this happened. Is this what we actually want to have happen? And you know, what can we do about this? So another good one here is we put something. So this is a put. Let's go here to the get. So if we get this number 4 here, it's this sort of Richard Rowe guy. And if we want to update that, we have the body. And let's say that we have him checking in on the 25th and checking out on this. What if we change this to September 32nd? What's going to happen if we have him checking out on September 32nd? Oh, whoops, I have to run my auth. Send. Speaking of security, there we go. And I'm not going to go into the details of Postman because of how it works, because I guess the workshop was going into that. But basically, I have this auth token, and it's being saved out here, so I can use it in the rest of the collection. All right, put. So let's try that again. OK. All right, hey, look, we got a really useful error message that said we had an invalid date. That's great. That's really great, except that it was also a 200 OK. So we have 200 OK, invalid date. But what really happened? Now let's get that again. We're getting booking number 4. Booking number 4 is now invalid date. The entire data structure has been overwritten with invalid date. So obviously that's poor error handling there. So yeah. These are the kinds of things to talk about. And so then when we're talking about when we're communicating, we have this interop with other APIs. Let's look at this get all bookings. And we can do this as a search, first name equals Mark. So when I'm searching for, this is the sort of thing that, I don't want to say that this is a wrong way to respond, because it depends on your business model. But this is a question that I would ask myself. So I'm saying I'm looking for everybody named Mark, and I'm getting back a bunch of numbers from the API. So now if I want to look at each of these and see if it's the right Mark, I have to go through and call each one. So now we're multiplying the number of calls that we're making on our service because of the way the API was designed. So in a case where we have 10,000 things that could be returned, maybe we want to do this. But once again, this is something that, especially people that are in the test organization, this is sort of our job, is to come up with these sorts of questions to make sure that we are challenging all the assumptions that are made. So is a list of numbers really all that useful, or should we be returning the entire object instead? And then there's another problem here, which is we say we support XML. We do support XML in some cases. So if I change this header to accept XML. So it does return XML in this API, which is great. And how about in Get All Bookings? Does it work there too? It doesn't work. It's not working. So these are the very sort of simple things that when we say we have a contract and we're saying that we're supporting JSON, we're supporting XML, we're supporting whatever, we have to make sure that we're really supporting it for all our APIs. So this is a very simple sort of error that should definitely be turned up in the testing mode. So then a couple of more interesting tests that are going on here, sort of more interesting ways to use Postman. So if I'm here, I don't know if people have done security testing. They might be familiar with the OWASP Juice Shop. This is a great application for testing your security chops. So I can go and let me get the developer tools out. All right, so there's our developer tools, and we're going to go to the login. And I just am putting something in here just to get the API. So here's login, right? And so I can just sort of copy this curl. I love this so much. Copy as curl. So great. And I put it into Postman. And import as raw text. All right. So here's our body that we put in, curl, and we have all the headers. And now I can actually run this again and sort of see what comes back, invalid email or password. But this is not the interesting part. So what we can do with this is we can use this basic login. Open up. So here I've said, all right, we have the email address. And we're going to run this, and then we're just testing to make sure that I get a 401. So what is the purpose of doing this? I'm going to be doing a SQL injection test. So if I open up the collection runner, I'm not going to run it because that's really boring to watch. But the important thing is, oops, this is the wrong one. I gave away the lead here. Inject email. All right. So we look at some of the ones here. And I can see some of these, I got 500s, and that's sort of bad enough. So if we take this amount that came in as whoa, come on. We have sort of, I got this as a list from a security website of SQL injection attacks. I didn't come up with these myself. That's really a very important skill for any engineer, is to be able to find stuff to copy. So I pride myself on being able to do a pretty good job of that. So if I put this in, and I'll take this out. So here we can see the error that comes up when I put that in. This is the 500 error, but it's worse than that. It actually is we're exposing this query that's underlying our data. So now people that are want to do bad things for us, they know about our schema things that they should not know. Okay. And then if I keep going on, and where is it? There's a 2000 in here. Let's just ones that fail. Okay. I just discovered this feature this morning, that I can just get the ones that fail. Always new things to discover. Okay. So what we're looking for is something that came up as 200 OK. OK, well, that's interesting. 200 OK. So if I copy that and I put that in to, not the console, the Postman. So if I put that over here, and Look at that. It actually logged me in. Not only did it log me in, but it told me the email address of the admin. So now I have the email address, admin juice shop. Okay? So now that I have that, I can take that admin juice shop, and now I can do a brute force attack with passwords. You know, I don't have enough runners open, so I got to open another one. Okay. So I got a list of 1,050 passwords, and I was able to brute force that through the collection runner and admin123. So now, when I go back to the juice shop, I can go admin at juice. What was it? Postman. Yeah. Why am I typing when I could be copying and pasting? Yeah. So I go there, and I go admin123, and now I'm logged in as the admin. I've totally pwned the juice shop. So this is a nice, gratifying case here, and it's a good way to practice, but you don't want it to happen on your own website. And so this is just a few ways that you could be using Postman, and then, let's see, I got a couple more minutes. I'm going to just show one more thing in a similar way that you can, so that you can use this as even a sort of a, you can test it even as sort of a basic load running explanation. So I basically made a thing where at the beginning it creates a bunch of, let's go back to, sorry, I got to flip all over the place here. Exploring RESTful Booker, data load. So this is a test where, no, get. In the pre-request script, I'm doing a post. So I'm using the create request to make a post, and then I'm putting in 100 posts. So I'm putting in 100 requests, and then I'm trying to do this search, right? So every time I'm doing it, it's times 100. So then if I run that, and then my test is, well, on my local machine, does it take 50 milliseconds or less to respond? Because if I'm running everything local, a find should be instant. And we find that when we do it, that if I go here to the data load, and we go with the run summary, this is a good way to sort of visualize. It starts out great, everything is great, oh, well, maybe there was some garbage collection that happened there. And as more and more stuff gets added in, it gets worse. And now it's sort of more and more and more and more and more and more until now, once we get about 70,000 in there, the entire database starts getting bad. So this is the sort of testing that you could be doing to just sort of as a sanity check on your schema. Are you caching things or whatever, just using Postman. I don't recommend Postman as a load testing tool, but it's a good way to get started before you start using JMeter or something like that. So those are just a few interesting ways that I like to use Postman, sort of dig into APIs, and hopefully there's some good ideas there for everybody else. And everybody can enjoy testing, because it's really fun. So I have a couple of informations here. Oh, where are we? Go away. Whoa. Give me back my slides. All right. All right. All right. So just some list here is the RESTful Booker. Danny Dainton is very active on Stack Overflow. If you've ever asked a question about Postman, you've probably seen him respond, and he has a lot of good tips there. Swagger Converter. I'll make these slides available on Twitter if people want to see them later. The big list of naughty strings, I didn't really get into that, but this is another way that you can brute force things into your application to see if they break, and all the workshop materials. And this is how you can contact me. So thank you very much, and enjoy testing. Yes. All right.
Amber, we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Do you use the tests feature of Postman? And if so, like, when the tests start failing, how do you communicate that to the developers that the API is not working anymore?
So in my own practice, I don't use the tests as sort of as a continuous integration environment. I'm using JUnit and things like that. But I certainly know of other testers in shops where they do have it as part of their continuous integration, and so when it fails, and everybody knows about it. And the great thing with the collections is I can sort of pass the collection on to the developer and say, hey, I did this and it broke, and here's the collection with the test already in it. So I do use tests for that. Yes? More questions? Everybody wants to move on and eat lunch? Oh, yes, one more over there, yeah. So I think in the pre-request, so like in this collection that I have for RESTful Booker, I do have it set up so that the auth is first, and that's getting the token, and then it's injecting it into the header. So I think we were talking about this in the panel before, that the entire collection itself is communicating the contract order and things like that. And so I try to set up stuff in the pre-test so that this is my assumptions that I'm going to make, and then I do the actual test itself. Okay, last question, I think. Yes.
So when you showed us the exploratory test, you know, you put you change the data, and so in our team, we write tests. We have tests that pass and tests that fails. So should those just become added to the ones that should fail? Or do you, encourage?
If I was going to be using the Postman materials in a thing, I would set up an entire collection of things that should fail. These are all the things that should return a 400 error and make sure that they do return 400. Sort of like I was doing at the 401 in the security testing. Okay? All right. Thank you.